Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation. The title of today's message is Unexpressed Hurt, the Cycle of Displaced Rage. Okay? And the reason why I've titled this is that a lot of people think that they have gotten over the pain of the past. They erroneously believe that they have forgiven and forgotten, that they've gotten over the things that people have done. But the reality is that they simply have not expressed their hurt. And so what ends up happening is a cycle of rage being directed towards people that had nothing to do with their hurt or trauma begins to take place. All right, and so the root of the reaction when accountability is missing. See, the catalyst here is that individuals who are quick to call out others are often reacting to a history of unaddressed pain. And so, let's say, for example, an individual grew up in a household where they didn't have a lot of freedom, right? They felt as if they were sort of constrained and that they didn't have the free will to do what they wanted. What they will do when they become an adult, when they grow older, is they will try to then exercise freedom by calling people out, because the reality is that they didn't have the freedom to call out their parents. They didn't have the freedom to call out their teachers. And so when they grow out of that environment of school, let's say a high school or their home environment, they still feel as if the accountability that their parents should have had or the accountability that their teachers should have had was never addressed. And so they end up trying to hold other people accountable for the smallest of things, right? And so an example of this could be that, let's say they have a friend who maybe made a New Year's resolution and they committed to, I don't know, drinking a gallon of water a day. This individual, in a very harsh and almost tactless way, will try to call out that person and say, you're a hypocrite. You shouldn't be making commitments that you know you can't keep. And the reality is that all of this, the root of their reaction, is because they still are stuck in a place where they want to hold someone, let's say again, their parent or their teacher, accountable. But because that never happened, they end up calling out random people that might be their acquaintances or coworkers or even friends. And they often don't realize how hurtful their words are because they're actually operating out of a place of hurt and a place of rage. Okay, and the missing link is a lack of accountability from those who actually caused the harm, right? And so, as I was saying, their father, their mother, their teacher, maybe they had a bad mentor, a bad coach, the person who actually caused them harm, who actually quote unquote traumatized them, is rarely held accountable. And so the victim in this case, feeling this strong desire to hold someone accountable, they end up redirecting their rage towards people who have, again, nothing to do with their pain and with their trauma and with their hurt. And so the internal buildup is that rage that was never expressed towards primary figures, mothers, fathers, or siblings, becomes a pressurized force looking for an exit. Okay, this is actually a pretty common psychological phenomenon where if an individual is hurt, let's say by a school teacher that told them that they never would be anything, that they would never amount to anything, if they feel as if that teacher is never held accountable, they will then develop this me versus the world mentality, and I'm going to prove everybody wrong. When the reality is that they're trying to prove their teacher wrong. They're trying to actually hold their teacher accountable. But because, let's say, they graduated high school, maybe their teacher retired, they don't feel as if they're ever going to be able to actually hold the person who hurt them accountable. And so they end up redirecting this rage and frustration to the world, to other people who, quite frankly, again, have nothing to do with the trauma and the hurt in the first place. Now, let's talk about the mechanics of redirection, the redirection towards bystanders. Okay, and so when you're dealing with an individual who has not properly expressed their rage or hurt or frustration, when it comes to a target selection, when it comes to people who they have decided must pay for the grievances of other people, this unexpressed rage is often redirected towards innocent bystanders, people who, again, have nothing to do with the past. And the trigger, those who they are most likely to target, are those that remind them of the original abuser or share the same social or gender class as the abuser. Okay, this is a tale older than time. And so if there, it could be something as simple as their abuser maybe was a Red Sox fan, their abuser was bald, their abuser had a cat. Anything that reminds them of the original abuser, any person who rather reminds them of the original abuser, is an open punching bag as far as the victim is concerned. They're going to almost subconsciously redirect their anger from the actual abuser to someone that simply reminds them of their abuser. You also will see this when it comes to social and gender class. Let's say there was an individual whose father was dishonorably discharged from the military for something that he wasn't guilty of doing. Okay, that individual, let's say the child, could redirect this hatred towards the entire US government or towards the entire military industrial complex on a global scale and just have this great animosity towards militaries around the world, let alone the United States military. And they, again, are taking the social class of the military and they're redirecting their frustration towards that instead of maybe finding the person who actually signed the papers and the person who actually discharged dishonorably their father. And something else you will see is gender class. This is actually probably more common, right? If a woman, let's say, was hurt very, very severely by a man, or if a man had a very, very abusive mother who hurt him, he or she will often then redirect their anger towards all women, towards all men. Okay, it's very, very common. I mean, you can even, I forgot to mention race as well. That's also something that we see as well, where if an individual was hurt by a person from a particular ethnic or cultural background and they never held that particular individual responsible, they will then redirect their anger towards the entire race, towards the entire ethnic group, towards the entire culture. Okay, and the result of this is a perpetual cycle where the person offended by a bystander is actually reacting to a ghost from their past. Okay, they haven't actually held the real abuser accountable. And so anyone who reminds them of the original abuser, anyone who also might evoke a similar feeling that their abuser gave them. And so going back to the hypothetical scenario in which a young child or a teenager doesn't feel as if they have freedom or they feel as if they don't have the free will to express themselves. Let's say they get a job and their boss says you have to wear this as a dress code. If that boss then triggers this feeling of not having freedom, the same feeling that they had when they were a child, they may then direct a lot of rage and animosity towards their boss and start to question and challenge their boss's authority. And they're doing so because the words of their boss has actually evoked a reaction that they had when they were younger. Okay, and so this is why it's, as a human being, pay attention to how you react when certain people remind you or sort of bring you back to a past place. Because oftentimes you think that you're offended at the boss, you think that you're offended at this individual because of what they've said or because of what they've done, when in reality, it's something in your past that this person either has triggered by way of reaction or that person simply reminds you of the social or gender or racial class of the actual abuser. And this is an issue because, again, they never hold that person responsible. Now, I also want to address the illusion of forgiveness. Fear masked as moving on. See, a common false narrative that people have is that they often claim they have forgiven and forgotten their abuser, right? And so they'll say things like, oh, by the grace of God, I've just really been able to move on from my abusive father or from my abusive mother, but their behavior suggests otherwise. And so something that you will see with individuals who claim that they have forgiven and that they have even forgotten the abuser and the abusive behavior is that they barely talk to that person. They don't call their abuser. When their abuser is brought up in conversation, they do not speak well of their abuser. They actually sort of slander their abuser's name and talk quite badly about their abuser. Their actions speak very differently when it comes to this claim that they have forgiven and forgotten, right? And the reality of fear is that they are still operating out of a baseline of incredible fear. Many victims are actually afraid of actually confronting the abuser, having a sit down conversation and saying, this is what you've done. Maybe even provide a list of grievances. They are operating out of incredible fear, which is not allowing them to do this. And so, because of this, there is unfinished business. Hurt has not been fully expressed to the actual abuser, and a sense of proper restitution is missing. There is this feeling that the abuser hasn't paid for their crimes. Okay? And so, what will end up happening, unfortunately, is that the restitution therefore has to be paid by somebody else. Okay? And so, again, I'm going to use another example. Let's say there was an individual who it's typically, most of this rage, I'm going to be completely honest, is parental. It's typically a child who has a lot of hurt towards a parent, but there also can be cases of, again, a coach or a boss or some other type of mentor or leader in their life. And so let's say there's an individual who was on a basketball team. I'm going to use this instead. They're on a basketball team and their coach maybe pulled them out of the game when there was 10 seconds left, even though they were the best scorer, because maybe they said something inappropriate or rude to the coach. And because of that, they end up losing the game. They end up losing the state championship, and maybe he doesn't get an offer from a certain school that he was expecting, contingent on the fact that his team won the state championship. And so because of this, he has a lot of unforgiveness, a lot of wrath, a lot of unexpressed hurt, because maybe he realizes that the coach is someone that's very well connected in the community, and so maybe the coach knows people in high places, and word might spread if he tries to get up in the coach's face and hold the coach accountable. And so, but nonetheless, there is still a sense of proper restitution that has not been paid. And so what could hypothetically happen in this situation is that whenever there's an opportunity for them to step up to the plate, let's say they're at dinner with some friends and they offer to pay for the bill. If an individual at the table says, oh no, like I got it, or we can all split the bill, they will take personal offense and might even sort of lash out and say, no, I offered to pay, why won't you just let me pay? And everyone's looking at them like, it's not a big deal, man. But the reality is that he has not gotten over that scenario maybe from 10 or 12 years ago when he was in high school, where he was denied the opportunity to pay the bill or to win the game. Okay, and so in his mind, he has to therefore step up to the plate and pay the bill for everyone in order to fulfill this feeling that proper restitution that should have been paid concerning the basketball coach and the fact that it wasn't paid. Okay, and so the feeling that the abuser hasn't paid for their crimes often lends itself to the victim making everyone else pay for that. And so not everyone else is sort of sitting awkwardly at the table. They're looking left and right. They don't know what to say. There's a lot of tension, and this is all arising from the victim who wanted to fulfill proper restitution because of something that happened, again, 10 or 12 years ago, and this feeling that that abuser didn't pay for what they've done or what they did. And lastly, we're going to have the victim mentality trap, forcing others to pay the debt. See, a perpetual cycle that you will see here is staying stuck in a victim mentality that prevents true healing. The debt transfer here is that because the abuser hasn't paid their grievance debt, or they haven't paid, again, restitution, the individual, the victim in this case, tries to collect it from people who had nothing to do with the original trauma. Okay? And so let's bring up another hypothetical example. Let's say there's a woman who wasn't allowed to own an iPhone. Her parents maybe couldn't afford an iPhone, and so they had to get her an Android. And so let's say she becomes an adult, she goes to college, and people are therefore making fun of her for not having an iPhone, right? And therefore she feels a little bad. What she will then potentially do is then try to use shame as a tactic towards other people that do have an iPhone. And then she'll make that person feel bad and say, oh my gosh, you have an iPhone, this Android is actually a little bit better. This is all stemming from this feeling of not getting what she wanted when she was a child, or maybe feeling social rejection. And so what she does is that she makes somebody else feel that pain. Okay, it kind of ties into the saying that misery loves company. And so because she felt this deep shame and this sort of outcast feeling because she didn't have an iPhone, she now has to make someone else pay that as well. She has to make someone else feel her pain. And so this is oftentimes what happens, is that they're trying to collect people who they can share their trauma with. They want to make everyone else relate to the pain that they personally have felt. But in other cases, right, an individual who, like, I'm going to use a fourth example here. Let's say there was an individual who wanted to, let's say, buy a car with their own money, but for whatever reason, their parent didn't think that they were responsible enough to own a car. And so this kid feels very upset because they're like, I'm 16, I'm 17. I've been working part-time at McDonald's for the past 3 summers. This is my own decision. What do you mean I can't buy a car? Right? And so because this child, or this teenager in this case, has this built up frustration and rage towards their parent, okay, what could end up happening is that as an adult, if let's say they're in charge of inventory or stocking produce at a particular company, let's say they get another internship or another job while they're in college, if their boss or their supervisor tells them you can't buy this, even though you work for the company, you're an employee of the company, but per company policy you can't buy this, or there's a budget that you have to abide by, that could trigger that old feeling from high school that they were not allowed to make purchases that they deemed fit. And so they could then lash out at their boss and say, what do you mean I can't buy this? I think the company actually needs this type of product, or I think the company needs this type of service. I don't see the issue here. And again, their boss has nothing to do with the decision that their parents made saying that you can't buy the car. But because the victim hasn't actually expressed their hurt or frustration, they are stuck in this victim mentality where they feel as if nobody wants them to have anything. They feel as if everyone's against them, that no one wants them to make sound, or at least in their mind, sound financial purchases. And everyone's always trying to control them and trying to dictate what they can do and what they can't. And so they then make that person pay. They lash out at that person. They say, well, you don't really know what you're talking about, supervisor, or, that's the wrong opinion. I don't agree with you, Mr. Boss, or whatever. Okay, and so the evidence of this unresolved pain is speaking ill of the abuser when they are mentioned, avoiding contact while claiming everything is fine, and having deep-seated boundaries like keeping their abuser away from their family. Then this actually masks unaddressed rage.